my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. It is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And man, my guest today, I think, is becoming our resident attorney on the show. He's also an activist, man. My guy, Hector Oseguera. How you feeling, my bro?
Good, man. Good to be with you, Dramos. Always a pleasure.
Of course, man. So there was so much going on in the news today that I felt like I wanted to get, obviously, a law perspective from it, somebody who's actually practicing and has studied all these things. Man, because there's a lot of stuff going on that has implications, man, for the country moving forward, but specifically when it comes to people of color, a lot of things that we're going to be directly affected by. So I wanted to get your take on a few things. I mean, today's show is going to be a bit heavy just because the way the news cycle is, but we're going to, man, talk about this affirmative action case that is being seen by the Supreme Court on Halloween, ironically, and all implications are telling us that it's not going to end in our favor. We're going to talk, man, about another a school shooting, man, and you and I, before we got on the mic, we're just talking about how it's like, man, we don't even, like, in the news cycle, pause to ingest these things anymore. It's just like it gets reported and we move on to the next thing. So I want to take a second to kind of just talk about that as, man, as sad and unfortunately redundant as it's becoming, this conversation of gun control. And then we'll talk about Biden and probably one of the biggest policy changes that he's done is now being put on hold. And of course, the Republicans are to blame for this. So we'll get into that. And then on a positive note, man, we're going to talk about some representation that's happening in an industry that statistically Latinos are not well represented in. Of course, to talk about the entertainment industry. So we'll talk about a movie that made it a point to include, our Mexican brothers and sisters in that. We'll get to that in our Mi Gente segment. But man, without further ado, let's just dive into some of these heavy topics from this last week in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the Say it louder for the people in the back.
All right, man. So I want to start on one of the sort of scariest cases that's happening right now that I feel like is not getting a lot of attention. Unfortunately, and it is this affirmative action case that is being put in front of the Supreme Court. They're set to review it on Monday. Now, anybody not familiar, affirmative action in this regard, it's based off of a case that was challenging Harvard University as well as the University of North Carolina on basically how they admit students. Right, there's been certain rulings that you have to admit certain percentages of students of color. Based upon racial practices that have happened historically where we've been left out of those conversations, right? And this happens in the job force as well. You have to interview a certain number of a certain percentage of people of color for each position, right? And jobs are strongly encouraged to hire qualified people of color because diversity has been something that has not been seen at the corporate level in particular. So affirmative action kind of encompasses all of that. Now, the sad thing is, given the current state of our Supreme Court, it seems like this is easily going to be overturned. And even though they're saying take a few years for it to kind of really go into effect where colleges begin to, remove those policies that they had, it's a really scary implication for all of the work that we've been trying to do as a country to make the playing field a little bit more equal for people of color, right? I mean, for you as an attorney, man, when you see another case like this, Roe v. Wade was another one, but man, another case like this where it seems like we're going back in time from a legal perspective, what's kind of your take on what you're seeing?
Yeah, so, I have a lot of feelings about affirmative action generally because it becomes this scapegoat, and so many people use affirmative action to say, you're bringing in unqualified people just because of their race. And that becomes the thing that the right usually says. But what they don't tell you is that, in fact, the number one recipient of affirmative action is actually white people. White women are the number one recipient of affirmative action because, of course, it's not just on a racial dimension. It's on a gender dimension, and women have also been traditionally excluded from many industries and many positions. So
Sure.
even when you put in a program that is supposed to benefit people of color and that
Yeah.
usually gets demonized for helping people of color, in fact, doesn't even
Right.
address the structural problems that we've seen for so many generations. Now, about this case specifically, I've seen a lot of cases going back where people sort of say, well, this could be the end of affirmative action. And it hasn't been that way so far. Unfortunately, we do have this new Supreme Court that does seem to be a little bit more activist for the conservatives. So you do run a real risk that they will do something activist like they did with Roe v. Wade and overturn something that we've known for a long time. But, I'm not 100% sold that we will lose affirmative action, even if we do. It can take many years for it to be implemented, but I don't think that this is all the way done. And even if this were to happen, it's funny because it's never the institution itself that is racism, right? It's when you try to address the racism of the institution, that's the racism, that's like what people try to get on as discriminatory. It's not that we've been left out of these institutions for so many generations. It's the attempt to address that racial divide that is actually racist. And that's what the conservatives have been doing for a long time. And, like I said, I'm not 100% sold that the institution of affirmative action will fall on this case.
Sure. I mean, I'm curious where that confidence kind of comes from, right? Because I think the scary thing about law is that it's not necessarily based upon what's right or wrong. It's like what you can prove almost, right? And precedents 100%. That you can like correlate to the argument that you're making, right? So the fear is when you have a case like Roe v. Wade get overturned, right? And then, hypothetically it might create a domino effect and open the floodgates for people to be bringing other cases and then use this as a reference point as to why other things should be overturned then, right? So I guess for you, knowing that many of these type of cases create a domino effect, where does that confidence sort of lie that you don't think it is the end of affirmative action as a whole as we know it?
Because all of these things stand on their own structures. There was a lineage of cases that had led up to Roe v. Wade. And I, like many other people, I'm not sold on the theory that they used to overturn Roe v. Wade. I don't really think it was that structurally sound. I think that the lineage of cases, like you said, precedent that had led us to Roe v. Wade are far more convincing. And so I think it'll be very interesting for them to come up with a whole new rationale why this also should be rolled backwards. I think would be a little bit too much activism than what you said. I mean, Roe v. Wade was very extreme. I guess the confidence comes in that I guess I sort of fall back on the things that I was taught in law school. And, you have to have certain cases, certain elements and certain things that you need to prove for something to fall. If they were to do that, not just to Roe v. Wade and the right to abortion, but affirmative action. And if they kept going, I think it would be something very different from what we've seen from other Supreme Courts. So that's why I'm still a little skeptical that it'll fall this time.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a valid point. And one other thing I wanted to speak to that you said was how the Republicans, the right, will use this as a talking point as to it being unfair, right? That this is in fact racism against white people, right? And it's interesting because it's like they want to deny history. I mean, we saw it with DeSantis. I don't know if you saw him talking about America was not founded on stolen land, which is just, it's history. There's no way around it. There were people here before, the colonizers came, right? And it's like, they have no problem sort of ignoring that there was a problem that they created, but then they throw their hands up when we're just trying to correct the problem, right? I think there's this argument, it's an unfair advantage for people of color. It's like, no, we're trying to correct the issue that y'all created before. And that's all that's kind of happening. It's just, we're trying to make a correction here.
We're trying to undo the fair advantage that other people got and that we never had access to. So and it's insane because you do have to live in a sort of world view where it's all created for you to fall into something like that. Because for someone to say that America wasn't founded on stolen land, for you to pretend that history just started today and nothing happened before today, and then we're all starting from blank, it just, you have to really deny so much.
Right. Yeah. But but somehow they're okay with denying it, man. And that this shit is like is scary. You know what I mean? Like again, because it's all documented, right? You're literally just denying history and then claiming the rest of us are communists who are trying to destroy this country when literally like we're just trying to remedy shit that you guys created, like, systems that were put in place. I mean, the numbers don't lie, right? I don't care if you don't believe people's opinions, you don't believe commentators from certain news stations, but the numbers don't lie. It's not a mistake why the majority of corporate America is white men, right? It's not a majority why, that's not a mistake why, Latinos find themselves primarily in service industries or in lower ranking roles in companies, right? It's not because we're not going to college, right? It's not because we're not getting an education. Again, it's because we're not a part of that old school club, right? Of white people that exist. And that is a real fact, right? You talk about, they're making this argument that we're just pushing for underqualified people to get jobs. The reality is underqualified white people have been getting roles that they don't deserve over qualified people of color because of the system that was already put in place. And I just don't understand how you deny statistical facts.
Right. I mean, look, in life, unfortunately, many times it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And if you're in certain circles, you're going to be promoted within those circles. And if these are very closed institutions and closed places where they're not inviting new people in, you're gonna all you're gonna have is a perpetuation of what always has been. And so, it's not, I think it gets me upset when people say that affirmative action is trying to promote unqualified people, when you made the point yourself that it's been the unqualified people who've been getting these positions, and we're trying to even the playing field, but somehow having an even playing field is what's actually racist to them.
Right. Well, I think obviously it's based upon their own fear of their superiority and supremacy coming to an end, right? And then they're just masking it as the rest of us are crazy. But again, you can't deny the fact that, look at fraternities on campuses, right? It's like, oh, you're a legacy. Your father, your grandfather went here. For many of us who are first generation going to college or the second generation, we don't have that legacy. You know what I'm saying? Like, we didn't have the, our parents, even if they went to college, most of them didn't have the expendable income to join a fraternity and contribute and be a part of that, right? Like, and again, a perfect example is look at our former president, George W. Bush, right? Like,
he went to Yale, right? Because he's so smart.
Right, exactly. And like, would he have had that path to ascending to becoming the president of the United States if Bush wasn't his last name and he had, all of the connections that come along with it, as well as people who are willing to turn a blind eye to all of his nonsense prior to getting there? Of course not. Absolutely, you know what I mean? And it's like, it just, again, it makes no sense to me to deny it. And the only explanation is that they are in fear of their supremacy and their mediocrity no longer being rewarded.
Right. It's very jarring to be told that, like, you've had this role that's now going to be taken from you. Right. And so in a way, psychologically, you understand it. But, you know, you have to see that this institution was built a certain way, and that's why it's producing the same outcomes over and over. I'm so glad that you talked about legacy, because the right never talks about legacy and how many unqualified people get put into positions because of things like that. Right.
No, that's 100% a fact. And I want to touch on, since we're on the topic of kind of colleges and presidents and things like that, let's talk about Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, right? So we've all been calling for it. He finally does it. They're saying that he'd be forgiving up to $20,000 for millions of borrowers, right? And now, as people are applying, like it's been opened up, people are applying. If I'm not mistaken, millions of people have already applied for it. A U.S. appeals court has temporarily blocked it from moving forward. And this is because last month, attorneys from Republican-led states, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and South Carolina all sued the Biden administration in an effort to stop this or cancel it, right? And now their original, I think, lawsuit was denied, but they've been given kind of this stay to sort of figure out what the argument is, I guess, and to plan accordingly. And what they're accusing President Biden of is overstepping his authority, right? They're saying that this action that he's taking would cause some private lenders to lose business because it would prompt millions of borrowers who have their federal loans held with these companies to consolidate their debt into main federal student loan programs. All right, let's get the legal breakdown of what we're seeing as these states are suing Biden, and this, a court has temporarily approved them to kind of put this on hold.
Right. So, what they didn't sue for is to have the forgiveness of PPP loans when all these
Right,
businesses were getting
right.
handed out wild checks and Tom
Mm-hmm.
Brady and all these people were getting $1 million checks. So you got to understand what are
Yeah.
the policies that are being fought back against. Look who's going to benefit most from a program
Right.
like this. Like, I'll raise my hand and say your boy's going to get a little help from this.
Sure,
should it go
same.
through? And
Yeah.
it's important to understand that as we, because it ties in so much with what we were talking about before of institutions that have generally only helped one type of people. And now you're trying to break that history and it gets challenged. So, the first lawsuit was denied. And unfortunately, they, you do get to appeal and it will probably go to the Supreme Court once it passes this stage. So, that is very important to watch as well. But 22 million people have applied so far. Things like this, unfortunately, take a long time. But given how it's something that's already rolling, I think that the Biden administration will press hard to get the lawsuits going on an expedited sort of schedule. But, unfortunately, you really don't know how long this is going to take. And the longer this goes, that's people who could be getting help that are being left, still either paying the loan or whatever the case may be. The loans are going to start up again in 2023. So I think that it behooves them to work quick on this. One of the things, and this is sort of like behind the wall stuff, is that the Biden administration used a certain law to pass this debt forgiveness, right? And that is not the law that has been used in the past to forgive other types of student loan debt. And I don't know why that was, because I feel like if they would have used that law before that has been used in the past, it's less likely that they would have gotten a lawsuit like this across. Because the reason that they didn't get the first lawsuit got denied, the reason is because they did not have standing. And what standing is that you're somebody who was directly affected by this and has something to either gain or lose through this lawsuit. So that's what you're looking for on a lawsuit. And, I guess I'm curious, and I don't know why, the Biden administration used this specific law for this student debt relief and not the law that has been used in the past. Because I feel like if they would have done that, we might not be facing this lawsuit. So, I think that that's another sort of dimension to this that hasn't really been talked about too much.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing it up. I quickly want to touch on this because obviously midterms are happening, and there's all kinds of talks about the Democrats are probably going to lose the House, and we're seeing kind of Biden having these victories and then like the air is taken out of the his bubbles being bursted right afterwards, right? This has sort of happened multiple times with him, and then obviously it's a stain on Democrats as a whole.
Right.
What are your thoughts with what you're seeing thus far with these elections? And then, man, even I was reading an article about the potentiality of the Republicans just impeaching Biden for no reason, just because they can. When they have the House. So, I mean, what's kind of your thoughts on what you're seeing with these midterms, and then even moving forward with the next election?
Right. And, I would tend to agree with a lot of that analysis. I think that the Democrats were getting some victories, but it was too early on because people don't pay attention to elections until it's like very close, like we are now, just like a couple weeks out. People weren't necessarily paying attention a couple months back when all these things were happening with Roe v. Wade, when things were getting announced. So now that we're getting close to the election, the news is not as good as it was before. Right. And so I do think that that's going to have a very bad effect on the Democrats. It could deflate their support among certain people. And Democrats are really running with the Roe v. Wade message, and they're trying to turn out women voters who might be upset about that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of other issues. The economy is not doing so great. We probably are in a recession. People are not saying it, but we almost certainly are in a recession at this point. Inflation is through the roof. They're trying to spike unemployment to bring down the inflation, but that's going to create people who have no jobs. So that's another problem, right? So it's all these things that are happening and it's not helping. So I think that as the midterms get closer, it does look like the Republicans are probably going to take the House. The Senate is a little bit more of a toss-up because of the races that you have, with Herschel Walker and then with Dr. Oz and all this sort of stuff. But unfortunately, I would say that, those bubbles were burst way too early, and it doesn't seem like the energy has carried on things like this hurt. And the Biden administration just needs to be able to tell people, like, we gave you something. Like, if the Biden administration said tomorrow, like, we're just sending everybody a $500 check, that would be the best news in the universe for them, because they just need to have something to tell people, like, you know, I know things are bad, but like we're trying to do something to help you. And when things like this happen, you overturn Roe v. Wade, you do the student loans, but then it gets taken back. You know, it does not look good.
Yeah, I mean, what pisses me off, and it's like a part of me is almost just like these guys, the Democrats, just need to learn the hard way. It's like they're always playing catch up, right? Like why didn't you codify a law that would protect Roe v. Wade, right? Like now. Biden's telling everybody, like, if you vote for Democrats and we win, we will do that. It's like, why didn't you do that in the first place? You know what I mean? Like the tea leaves were there, right? Like we knew it was happening. We knew what potentially could be happening with this Supreme Court, you know, and still they didn't do anything about it, right? Until it was too late. They decided to now have this conversation. And it seems like that's what always happens with them. It's like we wait for something to happen and now, if you vote for us now, we're going to fix this. And it's like, bro, why didn't you do it to begin with?
Well, you know why? You know why they do this? This is the secret, bro, of Washington, is that this is more valuable to them as a thing to rile people up on. You know, like it's more like the dog trying to catch the car. Like it's just in the chase. You don't really want to catch the car, because then it all comes to an end. So the Democrats had these things. They could have done something, but they didn't, because it was easier in a way to tell people, well, you need to vote for us. All this bad stuff is going to happen to you, you know. And unfortunately, they don't learn that lesson that, you know, there's more value in actually doing something for people than riling them up on the fear that something bad is going to happen to them, which is unfortunately what they're always doing. They are always trying to say, like, yo, you need to get with us right now or else things are going to go really bad. You know, that message doesn't carry as far when you already got elected and then the bad stuff is happening anyways.
Right. And I think another thing is they're not fighting fire with fire, right? Like to me, we know a lot of these, especially like the MAGA Republicans, are just flat out lying about so many things, right? And it's very easy to fact check them. Very easy when you're on that public stage to put them on the spot and call their bullshit. And sadly, it seems like not enough Democratic candidates are doing that, right? I mean, I salute somebody like Tim Ryan, who has been like on JD Vance's ass about, you know, every stupid thing that he's been doing and showing the hypocrisy, right? You know, and I think that's been great, but there's not enough of that happening, right? I think we need to be pointing out just the flat out lies that are happening, and the people need to hear that, because unfortunately, the way our news is being segregated, they're not going to get that information from the news sources that they're watching, right? And you just need the people who are showing up to these debates and the television, you know, that it's being televised on, for it to then come out in those places. Because if not, the newscasters are going to ignore the hypocrisies and they're going to find a way to demonize the other person.
I mean, you watch the debates that just happened and, you know, it just gets clipped for the sensational stuff. You never get real substance out of it. And, you know, the sad thing is, you talk about a candidate like Tim Ryan, he's probably the strongest Democratic candidate across the country, and he's probably not doing too good. He, you know, his state is a very difficult state. It was Trump plus like 8, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So he, as one of the stronger candidates, he's probably in one of the darker positions that he's not going to get across the line. So now you're having to, you know, the fact that a candidate like Herschel Walker is running neck and neck, the fact that, you know, Dr. Oz, you know, I know John Fetterman had a stroke and that's been a very difficult issue, but the fact that they're running neck and neck, you know, it just, it's a bad sign, right? It's like you're looking for
or even Stacey Abrams. The fact that she's not dominating is a horrible, like, you know what I mean?
It's a bad sign. It's a very bad sign.
Yeah. I mean, and even, you know, Beto O'Rourke in Texas, it's like, that's again, another candidate who's proven that he gives a shit, right? He's, to his credit, even when he has those MAGA people come at him, he has a genuine conversation with them, right? Like he's not, he to me, you know, like you said, Tim Ryan is a strong candidate, probably not gonna win. Like the unfortunate thing I think about politics in this country, and it's not anything new. It's like the best person is not always the one that ends up winning, right? Because people just go for the sensationalization of it all, right? And they don't actually give a shit in real substance, and the politicians know that, so they just, you know, create this noise that will get their people to come out. It's sad.
Yeah, man. Look, we live in a country of basically 3 people. One person always votes red, one person votes blue, and one person really doesn't care until 2 weeks before the election. And whoever gets to that person, that's who traditionally is going to win. Is not going to be the quote unquote best candidate on the best issues, who's doing the most for the community, right? It's unfortunately whoever gets to that third person first.
Yeah, and it's definitely sad. I want to also just pick your brain when it comes to Biden, right? Because we're talking about, he's incredibly unpopular, right? That's a fact.
Absolutely.
You're talking about inflation being a problem, but I was also seeing statistics about other countries. If I'm not mistaken, there were like 10 other countries that had worse inflation than the United States,
Absolutely.
right? So this talking point that it's all Biden's fault is also a bit nonsensical, because it's a global problem because of a global pandemic that everybody is trying to recover from, right? And figure out a way back from.
Absolutely.
Now, not saying that there's not more he could be doing or this, that, and the third, but to blame it all on Biden and ignore the facts of the world that we're living in obviously is incredibly unfair. But with that said, obviously he's not doing all that he can do, or he's dragging his feet. Student loan thing was it shouldn't have taken him this long to try and put this together. We didn't see any sort of real cop, police reform like was promised, right? All of these different things. I mean, immigration is a mess,
Right.
So obviously he's incredibly unpopular. Looking ahead to 2024, what is your personal kind of prediction? Do you see him? I mean, he's stating that he's going to run, but do you see him running, or do you see him maybe, understanding that for the country it's better if he goes to the side, because you have other people like, Pete Buttigieg is more popular than Kamala Harris and Joe Biden right now.
Right.
Gavin Newsom is gaining a lot of traction on a national stage, right? Yep. So, I mean, what are your thoughts as a whole seeing all this?
Yeah, man, America is going through a very difficult period right now, because the problem with Biden is that he seems to be the only person who could have beat Trump, right?
Yeah.
That's why he was chosen. That's really why he won that election, why he won that primary, is that he had the case of, I can beat Trump, right? And so if Trump is again the Republican candidate, he's going to have the same thing to say. Is like, okay, yeah, you might like other people more, but who do you think can really beat Trump, right? And so unfortunately, as it looks like Donald Trump is probably going to run again and very likely to be the Republican nominee, if Biden is still around, he's getting up there in age. If he's still around, I think that he'll probably try to pull that same card and say, you might like other people. Yeah, I'm not so popular, but when it comes down to between me and Trump, I'm the only one that you guys think can win. And so you have to go with me, which is basically the same runaround that we got. Even if you look to Obama, right? Obama had a very terrible midterm elections and then got reelected by a wide margin. So he could come up with that. Historically, presidents who are two terms don't do well in the midterms. So he could say, this is just history. This is what happens. But you guys still got to go with me because I'm the only one who could beat Trump.
Right. I mean, do you think that he could beat Trump this second time around?
Yeah. I mean, Americans don't just, again, it's so hard with Trump because he breaks all the patterns. But if you look at the patterns of American history, somebody in Biden's position would be very strong to be reelected. Yes, inflation, that's given a lot of other things because inflation has ended a lot of presidencies, right? So if let's say inflation gets under control and we're in a more normal state, honestly, I just thinking about who could beat Trump, having done it already, gives him a better case. And the second time around, people tend to not always do better. So if Trump lost this last time, the second time he might lose by a larger margin, is what history would try to say. Obviously Trump is kind of a wild factor, so you never really know. But I think that his base has been kind of like baked for a little while. We're talking about Trump, and Biden just had to turn out everybody who says, I don't want to go back to Trump, which I think would be, at least enough to be reelected. So, I honestly would like somebody else. I'm not sold on Joe Biden. He's not my personal pick, right? I definitely would like a little bit more of a Bernie Sanders route, but at the end of the day, you always have those people who say, oh, that person could not win a general election. That person is too much to the left. And so they tend to go for the person like Joe Biden. So if Joe Biden's around and Trump is the nominee, I say he gets reelected.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a fair argument. And I think for you, when it comes to Latinos, right, because there's a lot of interesting conversations happening around kind of the science of why Latinos are kind of forgotten in this country, right? And a lot of it, from what I've been kind of reading and the arguments I've been hearing, is kind of like we almost have to choose a side, right? Either we are with Black culture or we're with white culture, right?
Right.
And that divides us, and it leaves nothing in the middle, essentially, for us to have representation, right? So what do you think it is that politicians are not only missing, but need to do to galvanize, the Latin community, who is honestly all over the place politically,
Absolutely.
and depending on where your ancestry is from, have different issues that they're concerned with?
The thing that I think politicians hate about the Latino community is that in a way we're very fickle. Like, you have to tell us why we want to vote for you. Like, we're not gonna, we refuse, I think, to choose that. Are we Democratic voters? Are we Republican voters? Or where do we vote at all? Because we really are focused on our needs as a community. I think it's very difficult for them to break us into that binary choice. Unfortunately, I think it leaves a lot of people just feeling unrepresented, and they just turn away from the system. They don't care. And so it's only the ones who are very politically motivated who choose the side, so to speak, right? Yeah. But I think that there's like a streak that goes across Latinos that it would be doable and it would have a broad support. It just is not spoken to in American politics because, that flavor there's no flavor of that in American politics. You either have to be, all the way left on every issue or all the way right on every issue, right? Latinos are very socially conservative. If you talk about religion, right? A lot of us pray a lot and are very socially conservative in that way, but we're economically very progressive and think that the government can actually do things to make people's lives better, mostly because we come from places where we've seen government not work. And so we're like, yes, you can do stuff and we don't care. And actually that's a good thing because we've seen the opposite occur.
Sure.
All those issues put together don't exist in America. That's why you have Latino strongholds. Like you have a place like New Jersey where it's a democratic stronghold. You have Cubans who came here right after Castro took over that have been voting Democrat the whole time. And people don't understand that, and there just doesn't exist that flavor in US politics of somebody who's come along and said, I have a message that speaks to, enough of us that we feel represented. I don't think we don't want to make that choice. You can't make us choose left or right, blue or red. We're going to go with whoever we think is doing the most for our community. And, depending on what the year is, what the issues are, that could be a whole sort of different candidates. You talk about the 2000 election that came down to the state of Florida, right? There's a lot of theorizing that had Al Gore chosen a Cuban Democrat from New Jersey to be his running mate, he might have pulled down the votes in Florida to have become president. These are things that people don't think about because, again, America tries to keep each bubble within their bubble. And they don't like the bubbles interacting because that's very disruptive to the system. And Latinos we kind of exist throughout the bubbles and we're not really, we're hard to place down. And so instead of actually dealing with that difference of opinion, they rather take the ones who fall into a bubble and ignore everybody else.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, again, it speaks to politics in this country is that they're not actually concerned with us. They're just concerned with the fastest route to winning, right? And the fastest route to maintaining power. So they don't want to have to do the extra work that it takes to actually figuring out what each sector of our community needs in that time period, right? And speak to the different values of each sector of our community. So, I mean, I think that's a great point. And last thing I want to talk to you about when it comes to, some of the heaviness. And I think this is probably obviously one of the hot topics when you talk about elections and things like that. And it's sadly gun control in this country, right? And the need for some sort of reform right now. In St. Louis, you had a 19-year-old this last week kill a teacher and a 15-year-old girl in a high school. He had an AR-15 style rifle and appeared to have more than 600 rounds of ammunition strapped to him. And silly 10th grader Alexandria Bell and 61-year-old phys ed teacher Jean Kuska died while 7 other students were wounded before police killed this man in exchange of gunfire. And in the note that the shooter left behind, he detailed where he bought the gun. He previously said that he tried to buy it at a gun show, was turned down, then purchased it from a private dealer. In the note, he also talked about wanting to be the next national school shooter, right? Like, and now this is like becoming almost something of clout, right? And that's a really scary thought. Now, police haven't identified how he was able to make his way into the building, but witnesses recall hearing the sound of gunshots and then windows breaking from outside of the school. And to the theory that, oh, we just need to have more security guards and lock the doors, they're saying that the St. Louis Public School superintendent said that there were 7 security officers at the school that morning, and that they were positioned near metal detectors at the school entrances where students enter and exit, right? So the exits and entrances were all covered, so that theory that we just got to lock doors and we got to just have people at the entrances and exits, again, proves to not be something that stops things from like this from happening.
Right.
There's a lot to talk about here and to unpack, but I think when it comes to the idea of gun reform or lack thereof, I mean, how do we not see these cases as they continue to just pile up, not making the push that we want to see?
Yeah, man, and that's very sad, and my heart goes out to the people that were lost in that horrific incident, right? We've seen this happen so often, and the problem ultimately boils down to the lobby that you have around guns. There's certain people that do not want any sort of limitation on guns. They want you to have 600 rounds. They want you to have an AR and an AK and everything else on you, and to be able to carry it anywhere that you want. And that's just not a sustainable position. We've seen enough of these incidents of violence that, honestly, like you said, the metal detectors, that's not a solution. The security is not a solution. Instead of they always try to put a Band-Aid on the issue instead of going to the source of the problem and dealing with that source. We have a lot of people who have these issues, feel whatever way that they feel and are going to commit these sorts of crimes. And we need to stop those people. And, what do they want to do these crimes with? It's always AR-15. It's always one of these, assault style weapons. And, in the time that we had an assault weapons ban, we didn't have these sorts of incidents. We didn't have these sorts of shootings in such a frequency that it happens everywhere, at a mall, at a school, at a game, anywhere. And we've ultimately got to come to the realization that the fact of the matter is that you can't just have a society where anybody could carry a gun anywhere, or else you're not going to have a safe society. We don't have to, we don't want to make that choice, but we're going to have to make that choice at some point. And, every other country, it seems like they have one of these incidents and then they ban the guns and it doesn't happen again. And for some reason, we don't have that dynamic here. And I know that there are a lot of activists around this issue. I know that there are a lot of moms groups that are very vocal around the issue of gun violence because, we think about school shootings, but you look at places like Jersey City and people get shot on the block, people get shot, all over the place. Gun violence as a category is a huge problem, and we have to start to deal with that problem of gun violence. And, I don't know what it's going to take. I think we've seen enough of these tragedies that any normal person would have wanted to do something a long time ago. Unfortunately, the stranglehold that the gun lobby has on our politicians is something that we really need to work towards because, again, we cannot have a safe society where everybody just carries an Uzi everywhere they go.
Right. And what's sad and what scares me is we're like on a path where we're almost becoming so desensitized to these things that we no longer, feel the need to continue to fight, right? It's just kind of like, oh, it's an unfortunate thing that happened, but, that's just a part of life, right? But it's not. It shouldn't be, right? I mean, like I was alluding to when we first hopped on here, you and I, before we press record, we're having a conversation of like, where it's like, I heard about it, but like I, didn't dive too deep into it, right? But it's like, because it's becoming so normal to us. It's just kind of like, oh, another school shooting, right? Another one. But when we were growing up, we remember Columbine, right? That's what you were mentioning. And like, it was like the world stopped, right?
Absolutely.
And like, you had Marilyn Manson was being blamed, right? Like it was like conversations were happening all over the place, right? Musicians were being blamed for making certain music because they were fans of it, right? And it was like all that we talked about for an extended period of time, right? And now it's like, this happens, we mention it, and then it becomes something you kind of have to like Google, like, oh, I forgot whatever happened to that story, right? It just becomes And that is what scares me, because then it becomes easier and easier for these politicians to kind of just, pull a Homer Simpson and fade into the bush because we're not paying attention anymore,
Absolutely. And like I said, it's an ongoing problem. We have people like this who suffer these issues, and we have to deal with that issue. We have guns that are out of control, and it's just like the
Right.
confluence of these things that happens on such a long-term basis. Is like, you're right. It's like it happens, people mourn, and then it's forgotten. And it's like another one,
Yeah.
another one, and another one. And it's just like for a normal person, it's kind of even hard to continue to keep track of every single one that happens.
Right. Well, it's not, even for your own mental health, it's like hard to even dive into these stories, right? Because you can't help but feel something when you begin to read the details, right? When it becomes personal and you see the pictures of the victims and their families mourning, it's like, I don't want to have to be inundated with that every week on my television screen. It's heavy, and it's just like this really sad thing that, man, it really just speaks to morality in this country, that these politicians are genuinely choosing money over the lives of innocent people in this country, and whether they're doing it consciously or they're feeding themselves the lie that, there's nothing they can do, right? This is just the way things are. I don't know, but either way, it really just speaks to, money being placed over lives at this point in this country. And it's just disgusting to see.
Absolutely, yo. We have a government where there's always money for death, but never money for life, man. If you want to pay to kill 1 million people on the other side of the globe, the government will fund it immediately, but they won't fund $1 to help save a life in our own country, where, you have these incidents that have become way too normal, way too common. And, as a country, I would hope that at some point we just step up and say that it's not a way of life that we're going to support, or something that we're going to accept. Yeah.
No, I definitely echo that sentiment. So, man, on that note, we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff. I want to get into some lighter stuff and kind of, celebrate some progress in an industry that needs it. So we'll do that in our Mi Gente segment. But first, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. Mi Gente. All right, man. So I recently had given a talk where I was mentioning the abysmal statistics of the entertainment industry and Latin representation, right? And there's this story that just came out about the new Creed movie that I thought was really positive, and it was a really good observation by a big star like Michael B. Jordan to have. But first and foremost, I want to talk about the statistics where, according to CNN, they say that it's estimated that Latino representation in the media industry has only risen 1% between 2010 and 2019. And that brings the number from 11% to 12%. And they're saying even more concerning is the fact that Latinos comprise just 4% of the industry's management, despite being 18% of the workforce and 19% of the population, right? And this is scary for a number of reasons I've addressed on the podcast, so I won't go crazy with going too in depth, but the argument, and I think rightfully that is made, is that media often controls how people view others, right? Or and how they get their information about communities that they're not involved with on a regular basis. So by not having proper representation, we're not able to share our stories correctly. We're not able to control the narrative that goes out there and make sure that we're being represented as full human beings, rather than just like gangsters, drug dealers, whatever the case may be. So that's why I think that this is such a big topic of conversation, because I know a lot of people might brush it off just like, oh, who cares? It's not real life. It's television and this and that. But like all of this has real world implications, right? And to how we are viewed when we step outside of our homes, right? And that's why it's important for people to take a stand, those who are in power. And I want to talk about Michael B. Jordan, who is directing, producing, and starring in this latest Creed movie. And he talked about how there was a lack of Mexican representation in this franchise, right? And it should be obvious because there are so many Latinos, specifically Mexican culture is so huge on boxing, right? Like that should have been a very obvious thing around the storyline of any movie that involves boxing. But, it took them 3 movies to address it. But, they have now Canelo Alvarez being a part of this latest movie, which is obviously huge. And like I said, to my point, these are the types of things that we need in order to have that full spectrum of view of us as human beings, and our contributions to this world and this country.
Right. And I think it's important because the media programs how people interact with the world in so many ways. And we sort of take it as a given, but it's a very active thing that occurs to us, is that that's how you program kids, right? Is the things that they see on TV is the things that they're going to reflect in their lives. And, just like you said, you give them a little credit, you say 3 movies, but it's like really 8 movies if you're talking about the whole Rocky franchise. And and this is the first time you guys found a Mexican boxer, bro. Like, that sounds a little sus to me, right? Because Latinos love boxing, right? So this would have been a obvious go-to. So I think it is a beautiful thing. I think it's good to open up that full spectrum and to show people in their full diversity and their full beauty and their full light. And those statistics that you mentioned, I think they're very harrowing, right? It's like we're basically a fifth of the population, but we're less than 10% of the management. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Again, like going back to the conversation we're having on affirmative action, is you have these institutions that are built a certain way. And if you're not getting in those rooms, it's just going to continue to perpetuate what you've seen. So yeah, man, I mean, come on. I mean, like I said, you said it already, but a Mexican boxer was a very easy place for this to go a long time ago. But, despite that fact, it's good to see it happen finally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for me, one thing that struck me when doing some of this research, Joaquin Castro said this, that the lack of representation in media and the sort of one-sided storytelling that happens for our community allows people to see Latinos as anything but American, right? And that is a part of the problem, right? And those stereotypes that are created fuel the hate and fuel people to go out and commit heinous acts or even just have terrible conversations. I mean, Kanye with the Jewish community is another one. And look how you had those people in Los Angeles throwing signs over, the freeway. And Los Angeles, California as a whole, is supposed to be one of the most progressive places on earth. And the fact that these people are feeling so emboldened to go out there and be hateful towards a specific group of people in public and not hide their face or anything shows you the power of lack of representation, as well as platforming people who only spew hate.
Right. And I think it's very important when we have these conversations, because as you open that door and as more people enter these spaces, you have like that flashback of the old view sort of like really exploding and really having a say and saying, like, wanting to reject it. It's kind of happened with the Little Mermaid thing, where now you have a black mermaid and all these white supremacists lose their mind. And even on things like Game of Thrones, where you have a black character and people start to lose their minds. It's not so much that in a way, I think that it's not so much that they didn't want black people or people of color in those spaces, is that they went to those spaces to escape a world where we even existed, and being forced to encounter us in their fantasy world is so jarring to them that now, I think that that's really what it is in a lot of cases, that these people, they wanted to escape the diverse world and they went to these other places, and now even those places are not safe from us.
Right. Yeah, that's a really scary fucking thought, man. But a great point, which I always appreciate your perspective. On a lighter note as well. I mean, Halloween's right around the corner. I know you are officially a dad now. Are you the type of dad who's also going to get in costume as well with your kid?
Hell yeah, man. I'm gonna be a Ghostbuster, and my little girl's gonna be the Stay Puft Marshmallow, and your viewers can catch me walking up and down Hoboken, where we'll be trick or treating for her first Halloween.
Man, that's amazing, bro. I'm super jealous of that. I always was jealous of people's families who went all out on Halloween, because my mom absolutely hates Halloween, even though it's her birthday.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So we never decorate or nothing. And I always told myself, when I get a house, I'm going to decorate. And here I am. And I didn't carve out the time to decorate. So I know you're inspiring me that I got to step my game up a little bit.
Yeah. Next year I'm coming through and we're going to make sure you and the lady get a matching or a couple's costume or something.
Yeah. I love it. I'm all for it, man. Man, my bro, always good catching up with you. Anything you wanna push people to? I know you're always working on various things within the community. your socials, whatever it is you want to push people to.
Yeah, man. Always active in Jersey City, Hudson County. People can find me at my last name, Oseguera 201 on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Things are always going on locally, and people who want to get involved are always welcome to show them the ropes and let them know how, they can make an impact in their own community.
Man, beautiful, my bro. Always good getting to catch up with you, man. And we'll do this again soon.
No doubt, bro. Be easy.
Man, big shout out to my guest this week, my guy, Hector Oseguera, friend of the show, as I always say. Genuinely somebody I appreciate having conversations with, man. I always love hearing his perspective on a lot of these crazy topics that we're talking about that are often complicated. So it's always good to have somebody from the community who's educated, particularly on law, and can kind of break it down for the rest of us. So I always appreciate him. Man, now with that said, I want to hear from y'all. We're gonna lighten things up a bit. Let's stay in the Halloween spirit when it comes to this week's Ask a Gringo segment. But first, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back.
Ask a Gringo.
All right, so I wanted to keep it light. We talked about a lot of heavy shit on today's show, and that's just, the way the news cycle goes. But it is Halloween in just a few days, so I wanted to, bring the nostalgia in the show and bring us back to some happy times. So I asked my followers on Instagram at DJ Dramos if you want to be a part of these conversations. We do it for each and every show. But I asked people, what was your favorite Halloween costume growing up and why? So let's see a few of the answers that I got on here. I know a bunch of y'all replied. Let me see. At Emily Rochetti, I'm sorry if I butchered your name. She said, my mom sewed a felt Oreo I wore like a sandwich board with an orange shirt because I wanted to be Halloween filling. And that's adorable, man. I picture it, man. Little kids make everything that much funnier, right? Like, any costume that normally might just be like, maybe a smirk, like it's just hilarious to see little kids walking around. Especially Hector talking about his little girl is going to be the State Puff Marshmallow. Man, that's just hilarious. In Oreo, that's a great costume, especially putting the little Halloween touch on it. I love it. I love Oreos growing up. I haven't had them in forever. Y'all give me these cravings when we talk about nostalgic things. I've cut a lot of sugar out of my life, so I got to stay away from this stuff. Let's see, at Lester.wave says, Peter Pan costume with some cowboy boots. I was on top of the world that day. It's always the accessories, right? And Peter Pan's a great costume. I'm a little jealous, but it's always those little accessories like the cowboy boots that just make you feel yourself for a bit too much as a kid, right? And I know for me, I was a ninja a lot because I just loved getting like the sword and the whole outfit that I could keep wearing around the house after Halloween, which is just absolutely I think the best part about a costume as a kid, one that you can keep re-wearing. Man. Now let's see. Last one. At Via Sayuri says, a witch. I always wanted to be a witch because they're the best. Witches costumes. It's funny, like I don't want to call them basic, but there are like the ninja was a basic costume for me. They're just like the timeless Halloween costumes, and like I'm just going back in time thinking about like living out the little fantasies you would have getting into your costume and going to school dressed up and seeing everybody's costumes. Man, those were much simpler times. I'm thinking back, for me, one of my favorite costumes that I ever had, and I just rediscovered this recently, like looking through old pictures. I was the Ultimate Warrior, the wrestler, the Ultimate Warrior, when I was a very little kid. And I remember I was obsessed with that costume, and then I would even wear the mask. Like I kept the mask that came with the costume like for so long after Halloween. And there's like pictures of me wearing it with my sister. Like I'm talking about like, months and months and months after Halloween had ended, I would just be wearing it in random family pictures. I was just obsessed with it. And then it's just like cheap plastic. I remember it breaking, and like my dad trying to help me just keep it together as best we can with like tape or glue or anything like that, until it just eventually broke into a bunch of different little pieces. And I was a sad little kid that day. But man, those bring back just such amazing memories. I can't wait to see my niece and nephew in their Halloween costumes. It's always a lot of fun. And then, getting to steal some of their candy when they're not looking is always a nice little touch. And it makes me sound like a bad person, but let's be honest, it's too much damn candy for a little kid anyway, right? Anyway, let's wrap things up, man. We talked about a lot today. Let's tie it all together in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for conclusion stew.
Man, so Hector broke down everything really well in depth, and that's why I love having him on the show. So I'm quickly just going to kind of touch on some of the stuff we're talking about. But, man, this affirmative action case, I know Hector isn't ready to, be all hands on deck as far as being fearful of the repercussions of it. But it's just a scary idea that these cases are getting brought in front of the Supreme Court and quite literally, with each one being overturned, just continue to set us back as a country, right? Make us go in the wrong direction. And again, when it comes to laws and cases and precedents and things like that, once you overturn one of these things, it can possibly create a domino effect for other things to happen, and as a person of color in this country, it's incredibly scary to think about the potentiality of things like that happening. Now, when it comes to Biden and this student loan forgiveness thing and the Republicans suing him and all that, I think Hector hit it on the head, hit the nail on the head when he said nobody was suing the government when they were giving people PPP loan forgiveness, right? And certain people in the government got that. Rich people got that forgiveness where they got this money back from the government, and nobody batted an eye about it, right? But when the everyday person is getting the help that they need after being hit with these predatory loans for college, that's when they have a problem. And again, it just shows you where the Republicans' heads lie. And also, this is just for politics, right? This is just for show for their base at the end of the day. And ironically, much of their base being the working class, like, should be able to sympathize with wanting to help other people. But they have a lot of these people fooled. And then, of course, the rich elites are loving this as well, because it doesn't affect them. And they would love to keep finding ways to take advantage of the everyday person. And as long as their loans are being forgiven, all is well, right? And then, man, with this school shooting in St. Louis, it's just another sad example of where we are as a country. And even in the note, it's horrifying to think that this person talked about wanting to be the next national school shooter. Like, this is something that these people are using as bragging rights now, right? Like, that's a positive thing for certain people, and obviously speaks to a lot of the mental issues that a lot of these people face. But again, the fact that it's so easy for a 19-year-old to get an assault style weapon and have more than 600 rounds of ammunition is scary. And once again, speaks to the problem we have in this country that sadly nobody seems to really want to address. And, it speaks again to our politicians valuing money and power over the lives of the people that put them in office. And it's just disgusting to see. And last thing, man, we talk about this representation in the entertainment industry and why it's so important. Shout out to Canelo Alvarez for being a part of the new Creed movie. I mean, shout out to Michael B. Jordan for making sure that this was a priority. To Hector's point, it took them 8 movies to put a Mexican in a boxing movie. But hey, I mean, progress is progress, and this is important, right? Again, you can just say these are fake stories. It's television. Who cares? But this has an implication as to how many people perceive, people of color in this country, and that's why it's important to have this representation and shit. 4% of the industry's management is Latino. Speaks to why our stories are often never told or told in a certain way that is not favorable to us. And we need to do something about that. And man, I think that's it. Everybody have a great Halloween, right? I know there's a lot of shit going on in the world. Take this time to enjoy, some childlike fun, and be it if you have kids or, family or even just you and your friends, the people you love in your life, and enjoy some of this time to kind of cleanse your brain a little bit. God knows we all need it, man. And that's it. Dramos.com if you want to check out some merch. As always, please like, share, review, comment, all that kind of stuff always helps us out. And everybody have a great weekend. Enjoy your Halloween. And I'll catch y'all on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Till then, stay safe. Peace.